One of the most prehistoric looking birds in North America is the Sandhill Crane. Its call is ancient, it's culturally significant for so many people across North America, and they even do a choreographed dance. Let's dive in. As always, I'm going to start with the identification of the bird. Sandhill cranes have very long necks, as well as very long legs, and a pretty long beak as well. Everything about them is long. They're pretty easy to identify in the field. In addition to this, most of their body is gray, but sometimes it might have a rusty brown colored look to the plumage. We'll explain why that happens near the end of the video. It might surprise you. The adults, or the birds that are at least 1 year old, will have a bright red forehead. There are also a few species that look kind of similar, so we need to go over those as well. The first is the whooping crane, which almost went extinct back in the day, and it's also pretty rare to find, so most likely you're going to run into a sandhill crane, but you might run into a whooping crane. They're a bit taller than the sandhill cranes, and they have a mostly white plumage compared to the duller gray plumage of the sandhill crane. The second bird you might run into, but it's even rarer than the whooping crane in North America at least, is the common crane. This is a visitor from across the ocean on the European side of the world. And these are also gray, but they have a black forehead and a black neck with broader white cheeks than the sandhill crane. So overall, there's not a lot you can get this bird mixed up with in the wild. Now, the sandhill crane is known scientifically as Antigone canadensis. Antigone means myth in Greek. If you didn't know, Antigone was the daughter of King Laomedon, who was the king of Troy during the time, and she was changed into a stork by Hera for daring to compare herself to the goddess. And the guy who originally came up with the scientific name for the sandhill crane is Carl Linnaeus in 1758. If you're wondering why so many birds' scientific names come from Linnaeus, it's because he wrote a book called Systema Naturae in 1758, where he gave over 550 species their scientific names and classified them into orders based on data from other early naturalists. So basically, he's the organizer of all this data. And unfortunately, Linnaeus did not stop with just animals. He made himself into a villain by also creating race and ranking them into a hierarchy, which was the birth of scientific racism as we know it, so not the best guy on the planet. Anyways, let's get back to the sandhill crane. Canadensis is obviously a reference to Canada, and that's because Linnaeus gave all the birds known from this region, the Hudson Bay region of the area, the subname canadensis. Sandhill cranes have a conservation status currently of least concern across the United States as well as in Canada, but it wasn't always that way. In fact, during the early 1900s, people thought that the sandhill crane was probably going to go extinct. Thanks to conservation efforts, though, populations across North America are doing pretty well, except for a few isolated populations, including in Florida, where these birds don't migrate. Mississippi has another one, and Cuba, where they're still listed as endangered or threatened in those areas. And even though it's listed as least concern overall, it doesn't mean the species as a whole is out of the hot water. An increase in habitat destruction could certainly lead to the bird's demise in the future, and there are also many states currently considering putting sandhill cranes as huntable birds. Our society certainly likes to create problems when we don't have any to begin with. Now, there are 6 subspecies of sandhill crane. I'm not going to go over them in detail, but they aren't very easy to identify out in the field anyways, unless you run into the lesser sandhill crane, which is Antigone canadensis, because it's much smaller than the rest of the other subspecies. Sandhill cranes reside on 2 continents. In North America, they hang out in Canada, Alaska, and across the central and northern United States during migration and breeding season. Additionally, they also hang out in Siberia and eastern Russia during breeding season. During the non-breeding season, they reside across the southern US and central Mexico, parts of the South, a section of central California where they just join in hundreds and thousands of numbers. And then there's also those year-round populations that I mentioned that don't really migrate and move in Florida, Mississippi, and Cuba, and those populations are declining in numbers. Sandhill cranes are native to wetlands and grassland habitats of North America, but thanks to humans, they've also adopted agricultural lands as their habitat. During breeding season, they like the freshwater wetlands and marshes, and then during migration, they actually have a few iconic stopover sites that some birding communities have created entire cultures around. For example, Tennessee has a Sandhill Crane Festival that just happened last month. Alabama as well also just happened last month. Washington recently had one, and there's also Crane Fest in Michigan that happens in October in the city of Bellevue. But the biggest spectacle of Sandhill Cranes takes place along the Central Platte River Valley in Kearney, Nebraska every March. Over 1 million cranes, which makes up 80% of the total population in the world, gather there to rest and feed, and sometimes there's groups of up to 200,000 cranes clumped together in one single spot. It's a super popular event every year, so if you're interested in checking it out, you'll probably want to book it in advance. Someday I'm definitely going to go check that out for myself. Sandhill cranes are a diurnal bird, which means that they hang out most of the time during the day and then rest during the night. Sometimes, though, they will migrate during the nighttime, but a lot of bird species do that. I mentioned this earlier, but they have choreographed dances during their courtship. Typically, two birds will bow to one another, they'll stretch their wings and leap, which kind of looks like a stomping dance, and it's absolutely amazing to watch. You can actually see this behavior throughout the year. It doesn't just happen during breeding season, so maybe a Happy Feet 2 movie should be in the works, but this time, instead of including the emperor penguins, they can include the Sandhill Cranes. Like most birds, Sandhill Cranes spend most of their time foraging for food during the day. They're omnivorous and will eat plants, insects, and some small mammals as well, such as rodents or birds, but most of what they eat is plants. They actually really rely on the leftovers of harvest fields during their migrations, which is why you'll often find them in those agricultural fields during their migration period. Now, we already talked a little bit about their courtship dances, but Sandhill cranes start nesting around April, and the young birds are typically hatched around late May or early June. We're not entirely sure whether the male or the female kind of leads out the picking of the nest sites, but Sandhill cranes nest on floating piles of vegetation, which they construct out of mud, sticks, and plant material, which both the males and females participate in that, and this is to keep those land predators away from the young birds. Their eggs are brown or grayish, and they have small little blotches on them. Sandhill cranes will lay 1 to 3 eggs per clutch, and they have up to 3 clutches per year, although it's not something that totally happens. Most of the time they'll just have one, and then they'll try again if one of their previous clutches fails. When the young birds hatch, there's something known as nidifugus, which means that they leave the nest about 2 hours after hatching. They leave the nest really soon after hatching. They can stand and swim within 1 day of hatching, which is absolutely incredible. They aren't full-grown birds until about a year into their journey, and this is pretty typical of the slow-growing, larger birds in the world. In the meantime, both the females and the males will both feed the young birds and will even separate the siblings from one another to, 1, make sure if one of them gets taken by a predator, they still have the other one, and 2, to make sure there's no competition between the 2 sibling or 3 sibling birds. Their main predators include coyotes, common ravens, raccoons, and mink, and most of these predators were going to just take advantage of the younger birds or eggs. If a predator tries to approach their nest, the adults will actually kick at the predator and jab at the predator with its beak and its feet. It'll also spread its wings to try to intimidate the predator away, so they don't really back down. They're really brave. Golden eagles, though, will go after adult sandhill cranes, especially in the air, and in response, the sandhill cranes will nosedive towards the ground to try to evade that aerial predator. One of my favorite things about sandhill cranes is its call. It sounds ancient and also sounds a bit like a croak or a rattle. You can only appreciate it if you hear it for yourself, so let's take a listen.
Oh, no, he's just recording. Not interested.
No.
Isn't that awesome? It totally reminds me of late winter here in the region where I'm from, here in northern Utah. That's when the sandhill cranes return. It signifies to me that warmth is also going to be returning to the landscape sometime soon. Now, if you're a birder or a bird watcher and you want to find this bird, your best bet is to check your range maps for what time of year they're going to be passing through your area, and then just go out and try to find that open land. Agricultural fields are a really good place to start, but if you have a large grassland or a meadow or a marsh nearby, sandhill cranes could also be found there as well. And if you really want to, you should go attend some of these sandhill crane festivals. A lot of that money goes towards conservation efforts, so definitely check those out. Real quick, here's some fun facts about sandhill cranes. Number 1, they mate for life, which means that they can be with their mate for 20 years or more. They also hang out with their mate year-round. They don't separate during the non-breeding season, and that's a lot of fun. When you see two sandhill cranes hanging out together, two adult cranes, most likely that's a mated pair that has mated and bonded for life. The oldest sandhill crane ever recorded was 37 years old and was originally banded in Florida in 1982. It was then refound in Wisconsin all the way in 2019. It's amazing to think how long some of these birds have lived for. 1982 is 14 years before I was even born. Now here's the really cool part about sandhill cranes. They'll actually dye their feathers using iron-rich mud. This is to help them with camouflage, and it's absolutely incredible behavior to watch. They'll rub their beaks on their feathers using this reddish-looking mud, and that dyes almost completely their entire bodies this muddy, brown, reddish color. Well, there you have it. It's one of the coolest birds in North America, the sandhill crane. Let me know in the comments below what's your favorite sandhill crane fact that I may have missed during this video. Remember to subscribe to Brown-Eyed Birding, where I take you on weekly adventures to find some of these birds in the wild. And if you'd like to support the channel, please check out my membership program and the merch. Both will be linked in the description below. I really appreciate it. As always, thank you so much for joining me. I hope to see you all next time on Brown-Eyed Birding Learn.